The drums had barely stopped echoing when Malia realized she had become a wife and a prisoner on the same night. The sky above the Apache village glowed in streaks of dying amber, the last light sinking behind the red cliffs. Fires burned low between the lodges, their smoke winding into the desert air like fading prayers. The people sang of unity, of peace hard won after years of bloodshed. But Malia's heart could not join their voices. Her marriage to Chief Nantan had not been born of love, but of mercy. It was the only way to keep her people from being driven into dust. She stood by the ceremonial fire, the hand-dyed cotton of her dress heavy with the scent of smoke. Around her wrist, the chief's people had tied the marriage cord, symbol of a bond she could not break. Her knife, hidden beneath the fabric near her hip, was her only secret now. Kohana stood among the warriors, quiet, apart. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes, dark and sharp as flint, had followed her since dawn. He was Nantan's younger brother, the one who never smiled at the celebrations, the one who'd once refused to take part in raids. The people whispered that he was cursed with a heart too soft for war. Malia saw something else, restraint, like a hawk waiting for the right wind. When their gazes met, the noise around her blurred. She looked away first, forcing her trembling hands to remain still. The next morning, the women gathered at the river to wash away the ashes of the ceremony. Malia stood apart again, letting the cold current rush over her fingers. The cloth around her head fluttered in the breeze, and she caught sight of Kohana across the bank, tending to his horse. He was alone, always alone, mending the string of his carved bow. He looked up once, then turned away, but not before she caught the faintest twitch in his jaw, a moment of tension that mirrored her own. When she returned to the lodge that night, the chief was gone, summoned to speak with the council. The fire burned low, shadows flickering across the animal hides stretched over the walls. She tried to sleep, but every sound outside, the hoot of an owl, the snap of a branch, set her on edge. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Her hand went to her knife. The flap of the lodge shifted, and Kohana stepped in. "Malia," he said softly, his voice carrying a roughness that made her heart jolt. "You should not stay here alone. The council speaks of danger from the north." She hesitated, caught between fear and defiance. "Your brother sent you?" He shook his head. "I came because he did not." The silence stretched. The firelight carved his face in gold and shadow, tracing the sharp line of his cheek and the faint scar along his jaw. He seemed carved from the same earth their village stood on, silent, steady, impossible to ignore. Malia's breath caught. She wanted to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Kohana took a step closer, then another, until the distance between them was only a whisper. "You're not safe here," he said, not even as his wife. And before she could ask why, he was gone, vanishing into the night, leaving only the scent of smoke and cedar in his wake. Outside, thunder rumbled far off in the hills like a warning. When the storm came, it came without warning, rolling in from the mountains like an army of dark spirits. The wind tore through the village, scattering ashes and song alike. The children ran for cover, the fires hissed out, and even the horses bucked in their pens as if sensing something unseen in the air. Malia stood outside the lodge, clutching her shawl tight as rain began to fall. The drops struck the dust, turning it to red clay beneath her feet. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy and wet, and she thought of Kohana's words the night before. "You're not safe here." But what danger could he mean? The tribes had agreed to peace. Nantan's word was law. Still, unease rooted itself deep in her chest, growing heavier with each crack of thunder. From across the village, she caught sight of movement. Kohana again, barely visible through the rain, tightening the ropes of the horse pens, the storm soaking his braids until they clung like dark cords against his back. He moved with quiet precision, never wasting a gesture, his muscles taut beneath the soaked fabric of his sash. He glanced toward her only once, but that was enough. Their eyes met through the curtain of rain. No words, no gestures, just recognition. He disappeared into the night again, and she felt something in her break, a part of her that had tried to remain loyal to the man she'd been forced to marry. By dawn, the storm had passed. The air smelled of wet cedar and smoke. Malia found herself restless, unable to stay within the chief's empty lodge. She left before sunrise, walking along the muddy path that led toward the river, her moccasins squelched softly in the earth, her knife glinting faintly in the pale morning light. She hadn't meant to find Kohana. But fate, or something crueler, had a way of putting her in his path. He was by the water again, crouched near a small fire, drying his bowstring. His skin glowed bronze in the first light of day. When he saw her, he rose slowly, not surprised. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "If my brother finds you, I'm not afraid of him," she interrupted too quickly. "Not anymore." The words hung heavy in the air. Kohana looked at her for a long time, then turned back toward the fire. "Fear is not what keeps you alive," he said. "Caution is." Malia stepped closer, the sound of the river rushing around them like whispers. "You said I'm not safe. Tell me why." He hesitated. The wind tugged at the edge of his woven sash, the carved bow slung across his shoulder. When he finally spoke, his tone was stripped of formality. Just raw truth. "The peace your marriage brought, it's already breaking." The northern bands do not honor Nantan's word. They come for land, horses, anything they can take. If they learn you're not of his blood, they'll take you too. She swallowed hard. "And you?" "I'll stop them if I can," he said simply. "But I can't stop my brother." Her breath caught. "You think he would—" "I think he would trade lives to keep his power," Kohana said, turning to face her fully now, including yours. A flash of emotion, fear, disbelief, or maybe anger crossed her face. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something dangerous. "You risk much telling me this," she said softly. "I risk more if I stay silent." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of unease. Riders came and went. Scouts whispered of trouble near the northern ridge. At night, Malia heard Nantan speak in hushed tones with the council, his words clipped and hard. She learned to move quietly, to listen from behind the lodge walls. The marriage cord around her wrist had loosened, but its meaning still bound her, and yet her thoughts returned again and again to Kohana. Each time she saw him, from across the fires, at the edge of the river or among the warriors, she felt the same pull, as if the space between them were something alive. She fought it. She had to. But one evening, as the sun sank into blood-red clouds, she found herself walking the ridge above the village, where the wind carried the scent of sage and smoke. Kohana was there. He didn't turn when she approached. "You shouldn't follow me," he said, his tone rougher than usual. "People will talk." "Let them," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "They already do." That made him turn. For a heartbeat, the guarded calm on his face broke, just enough for her to see the storm beneath. "I'm not like my brother," he said. "I don't take what isn't freely given." "Then you understand," she whispered, "because nothing I've been given has ever been mine." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say. Then a hawk cried somewhere above, breaking the moment. Kohana looked toward the horizon. "The riders from the north will come soon. When they do, you stay inside the lodge. Do not trust anyone who wears paint you do not recognize." "And you?" she asked. He tightened the strap of his bow and started walking down the ridge. "I'll be where the arrows fall." That night she couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but another kind brewed within her, the kind no prayer could quiet. She dreamt of fire, of feathers soaked in blood, of Kohana's voice telling her to run. When she woke, her palms were trembling, and outside, faint but clear, came the sound of hooves in the dark. The sound of hooves didn't stop with the sunrise. By the time the sun climbed over the red hills, the earth itself trembled with the weight of riders. From the northern ridge, dust rose like a dark veil against the blue sky. The warriors returning to camp shouted warnings, their voices sharp with fear. Malia stood at the edge of the lodge, heart pounding. The village that had been still moments ago now erupted in motion. Women gathering children, men reaching for bows and blades, And through the chaos, Kohana moved, calm, swift. He barked orders to the younger men, his braids whipping in the wind, his carved bow gripped tight. He didn't look toward her, but she could feel his urgency like fire in her veins. "Inside," someone yelled, dragging her by the arm toward the chief's lodge. But she tore away, searching for Nantan. He was already mounting his horse, painted in war colors, his men circling around him like wolves. "Stay where you belong," he told her without meeting her eyes. And then he rode. The clash of war cries broke across the desert like thunder. Malia watched as the two groups collided in the open plain beyond the village. Arrows arched through the air, spears glinted in the light. The northern raiders were fierce and relentless, painted in black, moving with desperate hunger. She could see Kohana among the chaos, his movements precise, every shot deliberate. He was the calm at the center of the storm. Then she saw him fall. A blur of movement. An arrow grazed his shoulder, spinning him off balance. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, and the sight tore through her like the arrow had found her instead. Without thinking, Malia ran. The battlefield was chaos, dust, blood, and the choking smell of iron. Her moccasins slipped in the mud. Her knife pressed to her side, her breath ragged. "Go back," someone shouted, but she kept moving until she found him behind a fallen horse, gripping his shoulder, blood dark against his skin. "Kohana," she gasped, dropping beside him. He looked up, eyes wide in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here. You told me not to trust anyone," she said. "That includes staying behind." He gave a short, broken laugh, even as pain twisted his expression. "You're stubborn. And you're bleeding," she snapped, tearing a strip from her dress. The bead trim scattered across the ground like tiny stars as she wrapped the fabric around his arm. The chaos raged around them. Shouts, hoofbeats, smoke from burning grass. Kohana gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. "They'll reach the village," he said. "You have to go. I'm not leaving you." He turned to her then, really looked at her, her face streaked with dirt, her dress torn, her hands shaking as she held him upright. Something fierce flashed across his face, raw and unguarded. "This will get you killed," he said quietly. "Then we die together," she whispered. A roar echoed from the ridge, the raiders retreating, dragging the fallen with them. The Apache warriors regrouped, their cries of victory mixing with grief. The attack had ended as suddenly as it began, but the silence that followed was heavy. Kohana leaned against her, his breath shallow. She half dragged, half led him back to the shelter of the rocks near the river. When they reached shade, she knelt beside him, hands trembling. "You shouldn't have come," he said again, voice faint. "You'd be dead if I hadn't," she replied. "That seems reason enough." He smirked despite the pain, eyes closing. "You sound like my mother." Malia pressed the cloth tighter against his wound. Then she was wise. The moment lingered, too long, too close. When his hand brushed hers, it wasn't by accident. For a heartbeat, the noise of the world fell away. Only the sound of the river remained. Then his voice, low and rough. "If my brother knew—" "He doesn't," she said, interrupting him. "And he won't." Their eyes locked, the truth unspoken but alive between them. The forbidden had already begun. By nightfall, the village burned with the glow of victory fires, but the air was thick with grief. Too many had not returned. Malia moved quietly through the camp, her mind still replaying the battle, the blood on Kohana's shoulder, the look he gave her when she defied him. When she reached her lodge, she found a shadow waiting inside. Nantan. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. "You left the lodge," he said softly. "I went to help the wounded." "Did you help my brother too?" Her heart froze. He stepped closer. "The men said they saw you run to him. Saw you touch him, my wife tending another warrior as if he were her husband." Malia straightened her spine. "I did what needed to be done." Nantan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "So did I." He turned away, but the warning in his tone was clear. "Do not forget who owns the peace in this land." When he was gone, Malia stood still for a long time. the silence pressing in on her like a blade. Then she whispered into the empty air, "I do not belong to you." Outside, lightning flashed again over the horizon, the storm returning, this time from within. For days after the raid, the village moved like a ghost of itself. The fires burned lower, the drums stopped, and the songs of victory turned to whispers of mourning. Kohana's wound had healed enough for him to move again, though his arm remained bound in fresh cloth. He spent his mornings helping rebuild the horse pens, his nights sitting alone near the riverbank. Malia hadn't spoken to him since that day on the battlefield. She couldn't. Not when Nantan's eyes followed her every step. He had become colder, sharper. Every word he spoke was measured, each glance heavy with accusation. He still called her wife in public, but the word no longer sounded human. It was ownership disguised as devotion. And so she learned silence. She smiled when spoken to. She obeyed the ceremonial gestures, but inside, her spirit kicked against its cage. It was near dusk when Kohana appeared again. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and juniper. The sun was low, bleeding gold into the river. Malia was alone, washing the ashes from a cooking pot, when she heard his voice behind her. "You shouldn't be near the water after dark." She didn't turn. "You shouldn't be here at all." "I know," he said. "But I needed to see you." She froze. His tone was different this time, less guarded, more human. She turned slowly, her hands still wet, her hair catching the last light of day. Kohana stood only a few feet away, his braids dark against his bare shoulders, the woven sash resting across his waist. The wound on his arm had reopened slightly, a faint stain marking the cloth. "You're bleeding again," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." That stopped him. His jaw tightened, his gaze flickering down before meeting hers again. "Malia," he said, her name low and deliberate. "If my brother saw us, then let him," she said, voice shaking but steady. "He already suspects me. What difference does it make if he's right?" He stepped closer. The sound of the river drowned out everything else. "You don't know what he's capable of," Kohana said. "He'd burn the whole village before he let you go." "Then maybe it should burn," she whispered. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, neither of them willing to move, afraid of what would happen if they did. But then he reached out, his hand brushing her cheek, and for a single heartbeat, she didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin, the smell of cedar and smoke, it was all too much. Malia closed her eyes. And then she did what she'd promised herself she never would. She leaned into him. It was not a kiss, not yet. Just a moment of surrender, the kind that says everything without a single word. When she opened her eyes, Kohana's expression was torn between longing and fear. "This will destroy us," he said. "It already has," she answered. He stepped back first. "Tomorrow I ride north to scout the raiders' camp. I'll be gone 3 days. Stay out of Nantan's sight until then. And if he finds me?" Kohana looked toward the mountains. "Then you run." That night, Malia couldn't sleep. Every sound outside her lodge made her flinch. The soft hiss of embers, the echo of distant drums. But worse than fear was the memory of his touch, the way her name sounded in his voice. She pressed her hand against the marriage cord still wrapped around her wrist, frayed and faintly stained with blood from the battle. It felt like a shackle now, not a bond. When dawn came, the riders left, Kohana among them. Nantan stood at the center of the village, watching the dust rise as his brother disappeared into the hills. His jaw was set, his hands were clasped behind his back, and though he said nothing, Malia saw what lay beneath his calm: rage, quiet and calculating. That evening, as she returned from the river, 2 warriors followed her into her lodge. "The chief requests you," one said. She hesitated. "Why?" The man didn't answer. When she entered, Nantan sat cross-legged before the fire, a single feather laid across his knee. He didn't look up. "My brother leaves and suddenly you walk freer," he said softly. "Tell me, Malia, does his absence make you lonely?" She stayed silent. I know what you did, he continued. I know what you think you feel for him. But remember this. He finally looked at her, and for a moment, all traces of the chief vanished. Only the man remained, dangerous and wounded. Whatever warmth you share in secret, I can take from you in the open. Her breath hitched. Leave me, she said quietly. He rose slowly, the firelight painting shadows across his face. The next time you defy me, he said, you won't be speaking again. When he was gone, she sank to the floor trembling, not from fear, but fury. For the first time she realized the truth. She had never been his wife. She had been his offering, and she would no longer kneel. Outside, the horizon burned red, the last light of day fading behind the mountains where Kohana rode. He didn't know that war was no longer the danger. The real storm was waiting for him at home. The storm came the night Kohana was supposed to wed another woman. Thunder rolled over the canyons like a cry from the spirits themselves, echoing off every cliff until it reached even the deepest parts of the Apache Valley. The people huddled beneath their shelters, whispering prayers to keep the lightning from striking their homes. But Malia stood outside in the open, her face turned to the blackened sky, her heart trembling as hard as the earth under her feet. She had tried to stay away. She had promised herself that she would let Kohana go, that she would let him fulfill his duty as his brother's second, the next leader to ensure the tribe's survival. But when she heard the ceremonial drums, when she saw the firelight flicker against his skin from afar, she could no longer stay hidden. She moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the cliffs. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking her hair and her dress, but she didn't care. Every beat of the drum was a hammer against her ribs. Through the curtain of rain, she saw him, Kohana, standing before the elders, his bow laid across the ground. The woven sash at his waist darkened from the storm. He looked every bit the warrior his people needed him to be. But when the wind shifted and he lifted his head, his eyes found her instantly, even through the storm. He froze. The elders noticed his hesitation. One of them murmured something under his breath, a warning, but Kohana didn't move. His gaze was locked on Malia, who stood at the edge of the firelight, her wet hair clinging to her face, her lips trembling. And in that moment, something in him broke. Kohana stepped forward. The elders called his name. The thunder cracked. He didn't stop. The bride's family gasped as Kohana threw his ceremonial robe aside and walked straight through the rain toward Malia. Every eye turned toward them, confusion and outrage rippling through the crowd. Malia took a step back, shaking her head, whispering, "Don't." But he only reached for her hand, his fingers trembling. "You can't," she breathed, her voice drowned by the rain. "Your people, my people will follow strength," Kohana said, his jaw tight. "And strength is not living a lie." The chief, his older brother, stood then. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, his dark hair plastered to his face by the storm. The firelight flickered in his eyes as he looked from his brother to Malia. And for the first time, Malia couldn't tell whether the storm outside or the one between them was greater. "Do you think love will keep the tribe fed?" the chief asked, his tone calm but sharp as flint. "You shame your ancestors, Kohana." "You shame me," Kohana didn't answer. He stood between Malia and his brother, silent, defiant. The wind howled harder. Lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it in two, the sparks lighting up the sky. The people screamed and fell to their knees. And when the thunder roared again, Kohana turned and pulled Malia into his arms, shielding her as if the entire world was crashing down on them. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek. Fast, desperate, alive. When the thunder faded, silence fell. Only the rain remained. The chief's voice came low and dangerous. "Then go. But do not come back." The words cut through the storm like a blade. Malia's breath caught. Kohana's grip on her tightened, not out of hesitation, but out of certainty. He turned toward the dark horizon, toward the mountains beyond the valley, and led her into the night. They ran until the drums were gone, until the rain softened into mist, until the only sound left was their ragged breathing and the soft crunch of wet earth beneath their feet. They stopped by a river. both trembling, from exhaustion, from fear, from what they had done. Malia sank to her knees. "We can't go back. You've given up everything." Kohana knelt beside her, brushing her soaked hair from her face. "I gave up what was never truly mine." The moon broke through the clouds then, lighting the river in silver. For a moment, everything was still in the air, the water, the space between them. And for the first time since the day they met, neither of them held back. He kissed her, not out of hunger, not out of desperation, but out of something that had been buried too long. It was both an ending and a beginning, burning through the cold night like fire against the rain. When they finally parted, Malia whispered, "They'll come for us." Kohana nodded. "Then let them come." In the distance, lightning struck again, not in anger, but in warning. The sky had split in two, and with it, so had their fate. The first light of morning crept across the mountains, staining the wet ground gold. Mist rose from the river like smoke, wrapping the trees in silence. Malia sat beside the dying fire, her knees drawn close to her chest, the knife at her hip glinting faintly in the pale dawn. She hadn't slept. Kohana had gone before sunrise, scouting the edge of the valley to see if anyone followed. He had told her not to worry, that the chief would not risk crossing the sacred ridge so soon. But worry had already rooted itself inside her. It wasn't just fear of being hunted. It was the crushing weight of what they'd done. She was a woman who had promised herself to a leader for peace, and instead she had stolen his brother. When she finally heard the crunch of footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. She knew his gait now, light but steady, silent but strong. Kohana stepped into the clearing, his bow slung across his back, a thin line of blood trailing from his shoulder. Malia stood at once. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, though his voice was hoarse. "A branch." She didn't believe him. She reached for his arm, and he flinched slightly before letting her pull the fabric aside. The cut was clean but deep, not from wood. From steel, her eyes widened. "Someone's out there." Kohana didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside the fire, stirring the ashes with a stick. "2 scouts. My brother's men. I sent them back the way they came." The unspoken meaning chilled her. Sent them back didn't mean let them live. For a long time they said nothing. The world around them was quiet except for the river's slow murmur. Finally, Kohana looked up. "We can't stay here. There's a canyon to the north. The spirits call it the spine of the earth. No one dares pass through it without blessing. It's our only chance." Malia nodded, though her hands trembled as she packed what little they had. The path north was steep, climbing through thorn and rock, every step cutting into her moccasins. By midday, her legs ached and her lips were dry, but she didn't stop. Kohana walked ahead, silent, always scanning the horizon. When they reached the canyon's edge, she gasped. The cliffs were enormous, red as blood and jagged like teeth. Wind howled through the gap, carrying the sound of distant echoes. Voices, maybe, or memories. Kohana looked down into the abyss, his expression unreadable. "My father once told me this place was where our people were born," he murmured. He said the earth split open and the first Apache crawled from its heart, covered in dust and stars. Malia brushed her hair from her face, staring into the chasm. "Do you think it will protect us?" "I think it will test us," he said quietly. They descended slowly, the light fading as the walls rose higher around them. The air grew cold, thick with the scent of wet stone. At the bottom, a narrow stream twisted through the rocks like a silver snake. They followed it until they reached a hollow beneath an overhang, enough to rest, hidden from sight. Kohana dropped his pack and leaned against the wall, his breath heavy. Malia saw how pale he'd become. The blood on his shoulder had soaked through his sash. She knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her dress to press against the wound. "You shouldn't have fought them," she said softly. "You shouldn't have come for me at all." He laughed under his breath, a low, broken sound. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't be breathing now. I would have been living, yes, but not alive." Her chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to be angry, to scold him for risking everything. But the way he looked at her, steady, unflinching, made it impossible. Instead, she tied the cloth tighter around his wound. "Then at least promise me you'll live. Don't make me carry the guilt of your death, too." He caught her hand before she could pull away. His skin was warm despite the cold air. "If I die, it won't be guilt you carry. It'll be love, and that's something no chief, no storm, no spirit can take from you." The canyon wind howled again, as if answering him. Somewhere above, an eagle cried out, a distant warning. That night, the fire burned low. Malia sat beside Kohana as he drifted between sleep and wakefulness, murmuring old words under his breath. A prayer, perhaps. She traced the edge of the carved bow beside him, her fingers brushing the handle where ancient patterns were cut into the wood. It wasn't just a weapon. It was history, family, legacy. She looked at him, the man who had abandoned all of that for her, and she realized that love wasn't a soft thing, not always. Sometimes it bled, sometimes it took everything sacred and turned it into sacrifice. When the dawn came, she rose first. The blood beneath his bandage had dried dark against his skin. She tightened it again, then brushed her hand across his cheek to wake him. He stirred, eyes opening slowly to the dim light. "They'll keep coming," she whispered. "Your brother won't stop." "I know. Then what will you do when he finds us?" Kohana looked toward the rising sun spilling over the canyon rim, and his jaw hardened. "If he wants me dead, he'll have to take the whole sky down with me." For a moment, Malia thought she saw something behind him, a shadow at the canyon's mouth, faint but real. A rider, then another. The drums had found them again. The wind shifted before dawn. It carried the scent of smoke, not from their fire, but from the south. Kohana felt it first, even before the birds fell silent. He rose quietly, tightening the woven sash around his waist, his fingers brushing the carved handle of his bow. Malia stirred beside the embers. "They're coming, aren't they?" He nodded. "Before the sun touches the ridge." The canyon had protected them through the night, but now it felt like a trap. Walls too steep, exits too far. The narrow stream shimmered faintly in the gray light, the last trace of calm before the storm. Malia stood, tightening the cloth band around her hair. Her hand went to the small knife at her hip. She didn't tremble this time. "Then we don't run." Kohana looked at her for a long moment. Her face was drawn, tired, but her eyes burned with something fierce, the same fire he'd seen in warriors before a final charge. He took her hand once, pressing it to his chest. "Whatever happens, remember, you were never his prisoner." She didn't reply, only squeezed his hand once, then turned toward the canyon mouth where the first glint of metal appeared between the rocks. Nantan's riders. The chief led them himself. He was draped in ceremonial leather, his long shadow falling across the sand as the sun rose behind him. His face was unreadable, carved in stone, but his voice, when he called out, echoed through the gorge with thunderous weight. "Kohana," he shouted, "you shame your blood. Give her back, and I will grant you a warrior's death." Kohana stepped forward, bow in hand, arrow notched but lowered. "You would speak of shame, brother, after using her as a bargain for peace?" Nantan's eyes narrowed. "You've turned your back on your people." "I've turned my back on a lie." The words struck like an arrow themselves. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Then the first spear flew. Kohana's arrow met it midair. The sound of the impact rang through the canyon like a spark lighting powder. Chaos erupted. Warriors surged forward on horseback, their cries bouncing off the canyon walls. Kohana moved like wind and shadow, every step measured, every arrow precise. Malia ducked behind the rocks, then rose again when she saw one rider break through. She threw her knife, the blade catching the morning light before sinking into the man's arm. Kohana turned, saw her, and something fierce and proud flashed across his face. Then came the sound, a sharp hiss. An arrow struck Kohana's side. He stumbled, caught himself against the rocks, and drew another arrow, firing it without hesitation. The man who'd shot him fell. But Kohana didn't stop. He moved again, defending her, defending what little time they had left. Nantan dismounted slowly, watching, his expression unreadable. When the dust cleared, and only the three of them remained, 2 brothers and the woman between them, he walked forward, spear in hand. Malia rushed to Kohana, catching him as he fell to one knee. His breath came hard and ragged. "Stay back," he whispered, but Nantan kept coming. "You could have ruled beside me," he said softly. "Now you'll die for a woman who will curse your name." Kohana forced himself upright, gripping his bow with one hand, blood seeping down his side. "If she curses me, it will still mean my name touched her lips." Nantan lunged. The brothers collided, spear against bow, blood against dust. The sound of it was raw, human, ancient. Kohana twisted, using his last strength to break the spear in half. He drove the broken shaft into the sand, disarming his brother. They stood inches apart, both breathing hard. Then Nantan looked at Malia, and for the first time, something faltered in his face. Regret, perhaps, or fury too deep to name. "She will destroy what's left of you," he spat. Kohana didn't answer. He simply drew his last arrow, turned the carved handle toward his brother, and let it fall between them. Then let the spirits decide who was right. He fell before Nantan could catch him. Malia dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. His breathing was shallow, his skin burning beneath her hands. "Don't," she whispered, shaking him. "You can't leave me like this." His eyes opened, barely, and a faint smile touched his lips. "I told you," he breathed. "If I die, it won't be guilt you carry, only love." And as the sun broke fully over the canyon, painting the rocks crimson and gold, Kohana's hand slipped from hers. Nantan stood for a long moment, staring at them, at the woman who had once been his peace and the brother who had been his pride. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away without a word. Malia didn't move until the fire in the east began to fade into white light. She touched the carved bow beside him, still warm, still marked with his hand, and tied his woven sash around her wrist. When she finally rose, the canyon wind lifted her hair, scattering ashes into the rising sky. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, not in mourning, but in freedom. She turned north and walked, barefoot and silent, into the dawn.